Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 496, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 6. How the Girdle of Truth is the key to your victory in spiritual warfare and turning back the curse of this captivity. The podcast objectives are analyze the importance of truth in spiritual warfare, analyze the role of division in spiritual warfare, analyze the spiritual genocide of the nation of Israel, and reveal how the girdle of truth confirms your election. He is not girding them with truth. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 365 of our exposition of lawlessness. That's right, my friends. Today marks the 1-year anniversary of our exposition of lawlessness. No doubt, this is the longest series we have created in this podcast ministry. And the truth is, we're just getting started. Remember, there are 80 degrees of lawlessness, and to date, we have only addressed 16. Notwithstanding, these 16 represent the foundation of lawlessness, and thus the following is true. If you have been with us from the beginning of this series, you are very close to destroying the foundation of lawlessness in your life. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, this is huge, and it is more important than anything else being discussed within our nation. And if you haven't come to this conclusion, I am quite sure that you will by the end of this podcast. Now, first things first, in the most recent podcast, we introduced the girdle of truth. That is, the piece within the whole armor of Elohim that corresponds with the fear of Elohim and the chief weapon within your spiritual arsenal. Now, to further demonstrate the infinite value of the girdle of truth, you should consider what I told you about the enemy in our series on virtue and contempt. Vis-a-vis, Satan walks about like a roaring lion looking for someone who is not wearing the breastplate of righteousness. Now, let me tell you something. Satan may be avoiding a virtuous woman and an honest man, but he is running away from everyone who is wearing the girdle of truth as far and as fast as he can. Here is why. If you are wearing the girdle of truth, you will never lose a spiritual battle for the simple but sure fact that you cannot be deceived. And where there is no deception, the enemy has no path to victory. My dear friends, this may be the most decisive inflection point in your entire quest. Just think about it. As you progress from virtue to the fear of Elohim, the enemy stops looking for you and he starts running away from you. Now, if I had all day, I would dive deeper into this amazing example of spiritual power and the critical juncture in which we become immensely superior in spiritual warfare. But time is of the essence, my friends, always of the essence. Ergo, we should progress this discussion by asking the following question. Seeing how the fear of Elohim is the focus of all spiritual power and the chief component of every victory you obtain. Why are so many within this nation going into spiritual battles without the girdle of truth? The answer is sure, and we have touched on it before. Vis-a-vis, these rebels never developed a love for the truth. And this is why they have not been equipped with the girdle of truth. Now, here lies the inflection, the problem, and a crucial warning. To wit, you cannot take up the girdle of truth if you do not possess a sincere desire and love for the truth. Here is why. Every weapon within the whole armor of Elohim is an investment Yahuwah is only making in those who love the truth. For our love for the truth is living proof of our love for him. Not only this, but the primary investment Yahuwah is making in those who love him is the girdle of truth, the key piece that unites and activates every weapon within the whole armor of Elohim. We know this because to gird, by definition, is to provide, equip, or invest as with power or strength. Ergo, by girding us with truth, Yahuwah has provided, equipped, and invested all the power and strength we need to succeed in spiritual warfare. Praise Yah. Now, if you think Yahuwah is making this investment, i.e., a full investment in those who do not fear him, you are deceived and you are drowning in your sins. Let me tell you something. Yahuwah will not make a full investment in anyone who does not love him. And as I have said before, it is impossible to love him if you are not walking in his fear. Remember, the fear of Elohim is the first of the 7 tests of love in your quest. Ergo, those who do not fear Elohim cannot possibly love Elohim, which is why he is not girding them with the truth. My dear friends, you must believe me. Yahuwah will not invest a commodity as precious as the truth in the hearts of spiritual deviants and lowlives. This is why they are going into spiritual battles without the girdle of truth and constantly being defeated. Alas, this is the depressed state of our nation, and Yahuwah has called me to address it in this podcast. To wit, the downfall of those who are going into spiritual battles without a girdle of truth. Let's talk about it. The business of division. Now, first of all, you should note that I have addressed this matter in prior podcasts. Ergo, I'm not going to relitigate the truth that the majority within this nation are enemies of Elohim. And yet, I will remind you why this is the case. The majority within this nation are operating to some degree in doubt, which is why they are unwilling to walk in obedient faith to guard all the commands of Elohim. Now, that was the inflection. Here is the problem. To wit, the final phase and the progression of disobedience and doubt is opposition. Ergo, all who refuse to walk in obedient faith to the truth Yahuwah has revealed to them are not only enemies of the truth. My dear friends, these villains and thieves are also enemies of Elohim. Here lies another inflection and another problem. And although I have touched on this matter in times past, I will touch on it again. Remember this, my friends, and do not forget. If you fail to walk in the truth Yahuwah has revealed to you, his Ruach will not lead you into the truth he had in store for you. Not only this, but he will give you up to the foul spirit of deception, such that you should believe in many lies. Now, here lies the problem, and we touched on it in the most recent podcast. To wit, Satan's only path to victory lies in deception. Ergo, by refusing to obey the truth, the majority in this nation are handing Satan the victory. And all the while, they are being deceived. For while they think they are worshiping the Most High Elohim, these rebels are engaging in delusional blasphemy. And if you think that's bad, let me tell you something. It gets worse. Look here. Deception breeds division, and a nation divided cannot stand. It will never defeat the enemy in spiritual warfare. Alas, this is why our nation, on the whole, is as pathetic and as inept and in spiritual disarray. Listen to me. It is why 100 men in this nation are following 100 different paths, and all of them are ignorant to the fact that there is only one way. Why? It's because they are engaging the enemy in spiritual battle without the girdle of truth. And every time they are defeated, they are infected with 16 of the deadliest degrees of lawlessness. You should know them by now. Ignorance, deception, rejection, thoughtlessness, disregard, misconception, imprudence, insanity, error, confusion, indecision, misjudgment, denial, delusion, incompetence, and failure. Now, let's talk about division. As you know, division is a degree of lawlessness. And like deception, division is one of Satan's favorite devices. Along these lines, his desire is to divide our nation so that we remain under the curse of this captivity. Here is how. As the source of our captivity is lawlessness, our captivity can only be turned back by our victory over lawlessness. And the only way we can gain the victory over lawlessness is by defeating the enemy in spiritual warfare. Now, that was the inflection. Here is the problem. To wit, our nation is failing to defeat the enemy in spiritual warfare because we are divided. And we are divided because the majority has been deceived into following doctrines of devils and heresies. Be that as it may, the word of Yahuwah is true and forever settled in the heavens. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, even though the majority in this nation are destined to die under the curse of this captivity, that is not our destiny. Let me tell you something. The enemy is not the only one who has the power to divide. Au contraire, my dear friends, Yahuwah is also in the business of division. Trust me, he has always made a difference between the clean and the unclean. And if you would receive it, this is the spiritual premise for the election of trust, which determines every member of the remnant of Jacob, proving Elohim is with us. And thus, I will not have you to be discouraged by all the division and heresies in the extended nation of Israel. On the contrary, you should be encouraged, for Yahuwah has invested the girdle of truth in you, and he has opened your eyes to many spiritual matters the majority in this nation will never see. For While they were being divided, you were being set free. The spiritual genocide of a nation during its restoration. Now, it goes without saying that being elected into the renewed nation of Israel is the only thing that matters in these last days. For you cannot be sealed if you are not elected into this nation. And if you are not sealed, then you will never be saved. No doubt, the enemy knows this, and to ensure the majority within this nation are not elected, he has orchestrated the deadliest spiritual pandemic of all time, and in these last days. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, we are living in a spiritual pandemic that is causing the spiritual genocide of our nation. This is why Yahuwah has led me to designate the majority of our people as the dying nation of Israel. It is because they are thoroughly infected with lawlessness. And as it has been written, when lawlessness and sin are finished, they will always lead to death. Here again, we've touched on this matter before, and yet, seeing as we are at the end of this phase of our exposition of lawlessness, Yahuwah is calling me to address it again, one last time. Let's get started. Now, to begin with, you should consider why lawlessness is running rampant within our nation, suffocating the Ruach of Elohim out of our assemblies. If you do, you will find that there are many reasons why our nation is dying, and many fools are to blame, and at every level of the hierarchy. Notwithstanding, Yahuwah has always dealt with leaders first, and there's a reason why. Vis-a-vis, it is because leaders have authority, and as the heads of the hierarchy, they are accountable to Elohim for their assemblies and our nation. Here lies the problem. To wit, the majority of the leaders in this nation are not walking in the fear of Elohim. Quite the contrary. They are immoral and irreverent blasphemers who are consenting to the destruction of their flocks by their persistent endorsement of lawlessness. My dear friends, this is evidence that many of our leaders are instruments of Satan. For by murder, thievery, and destruction, they are doing his desire. For look, listen, it has been written, the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. And if this isn't bad enough, the enemy has increased his office. He has magnified his forces. Look here. The enemy has infiltrated the extended nation of Israel, and he is using decadent spiritual leadership as a conduit for its destruction. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, while Yahuwah was raising up the tribes of Jacob in spirit and in truth, the enemy so tears amongst the wheat. And the proliferation of the tares was so explosive and dramatic, finding an assembly of righteousness is a near impossible feat. This is why I told you, Yahuwah is in the business of division. Here is your proof. For he is leading the chosen elect away from depraved spiritual leadership and their cesspools of unrighteousness. And he is leading us into green pastures where we are being fed and girded with truth. Why? It's because he knows the plans he has for me, and he knows the plans he has for you. And while the majority in this nation are dying during its restoration, he is turning back the captivity of a faithful few. 'Tis sad and a pity, and yet, even so, it is true. My dear friends, think about that for a moment. Consider how the restoration movement was designed to unite the tribes of Jacob. And yet, several decades into this season, our people are largely ignorant, divided, confused, and blind. And the primary reason why is because the leaders in this nation are ignorant, divided, confused, and blind. And here's why this is the biggest problem of them all. No one in an assembly can ascend beyond the spiritual plane of leadership. No one. Plainly speaking, if your leaders are not walking in faith, obedience, virtue, and the fear of Elohim, neither will you. For if you fear Elohim, you will never submit yourself to the spiritual authority of a blasphemer. Ergo, your willingness to submit to spiritually depraved leadership is a witness against you. To wit, it exposes you as a spiritually depraved parishioner. And the truth is, you, my friend, are right where you belong. The assembly of the unrighteousness is the perfect fit for you. Now, this reality proves that faulty leadership may be the main problem, but they're not the only problem. Let me tell you something. There is a saying that reveals birds of a feather flock together. What does this mean? Well, I'll tell you. Get this. The goats, dogs, and swine within this nation are flocking towards faulty leadership. To wit, they are looking for assemblies led by men and women who are spiritually incompetent. And once they find these incompetent leaders, they will enter their assemblies of lawlessness with no resistance. My dear friends, agents of darkness are walking into assemblies all over this world with the intent to overthrow by contaminating the people with false doctrines, heresies, and every degree of lawlessness. And their amoral, irreverent, blasphemous leaders are welcoming them with open arms. What fools! And if you think that's bad, what happens next is worse than you could ever imagine. And what is worse, it is happening all the time. That is the spiritual genocide of a nation during its restoration. My dear friends, just look around. The enemy has this nation by the throat, and he is sucking the spiritual and physical life out of all the transgressors in Jacob. We know this because the physical reality of many in this nation remains unchanged from the beginning of the restoration. And in many cases, it is worse. It is much, much worse. Not only this, but our spiritual reality is worse than our physical. Listen to me. Beyond all the division, hatred, confusion, jealousy, idolatry, error, heresies, lust, greed, disobedience, dishonesty, non-compliance, non-conformance, insanity, delusion, etc., etc., etc. Our people are as powerless as they were from the beginning of this captivity. And as power is the foundation of our spiritual existence, our nation's lack of power is evidence we have no life. Quite the contrary. We, my friends, are dying. And oh, the tears we cry in a season when Yahuwah came to give us life. Many within our nation belied. We will not guard your commands, O Elohim. We would rather die. Now, if you are being led by the Ruach, you know these matters are true. And so you're asking the same question I've been asking for many years. What is the ray of hope? My Elohim, there must be a ray of hope. Let me tell you something. The enemy may have tainted the restoration from a physical, visible perspective, but Yahuwah will never be left without a witness. Trust me, Jacob will have a remnant, else we are above all men most miserable. And thus, the question of the hour is simply, how do you ensure you are elected into the renewed nation of Israel? How do you know of a certainty that you, my friend, are the spiritual remnant of Jacob? Well, I'll tell you in the next section. In doing so, I'll complete my remit, showing you how the fear of Elohim allows you to A, navigate the way of escape, and B, succeed every moment of truth in your quest. And to be very clear, our nation is presently experiencing a collective moment of truth. So stay with me if you're with me, because my time here is growing short. The spiritual product of perspective and understanding. Now, first things first, there are many requirements upon your election into the renewed nation of Israel. However, the fundamental requirement is the fear of Elohim. And after all you have learned over the past 3 months, this one thing should be very clear. You can do nothing of spiritually redeeming value if you have not unlocked the fear of Elohim. This is precisely why every milestone you achieve in your quest is contingent to the fear of Elohim. It is why the fear of Elohim is the first test of love, and it is why the girdle of truth is the focal piece which activates the whole armor of Elohim. Here lies the key, my friend, and it is why I have invested 2 podcasts analyzing the girdle of truth, vis-a-vis by unlocking this focal piece of your spiritual armor. You unlock the ability to see through every matter for the simple but powerful fact that you are a bearer of truth. Now, let's discuss this procedurally, beginning with what you have learned about reverence. For starters, reverence is the focal degree of the fear of Elohim, and the primary illustration of reverence is the eyes of your heart, a key feature which gives your heart perspective and understanding. Here lies a connection to it by giving your heart perspective and understanding. The spirit of reverence opens your eyes to all the truth. For truth is the spiritual product of perspective and understanding. What does this mean? The answer is as simple as it is sure. Perspective and understanding give you the answer to every test you will ever take prior to the test, and the solution to every trial prior to the trial. Think about that for a moment. Imagine a reality where you know how to succeed every test and trial before you ever experience the test or the trial. And imagine a reality where you always succeed the test or the trial because you have unlocked the power of righteousness and you are committed to always doing what you know is right. Now, here lies another connection to the central premise, vis-a-vis reverence is the primary application of righteousness. Ergo, by unlocking the power of reverence, you will ascend to a plane where A, you always know what is right via the power of reverence, and B, you always do what is right via the power of righteousness. Hallelujah. And this, my friends, is why the primary illustration of reverence is the spiritual eye, which gives your heart perspective and understanding. But wait, that's not all. Remember, tests and trials are only two of the three facets of the way of escape. The third and most critical facet is spiritual warfare. Let's talk about it, and then we will conclude this podcast. An enemy who cannot be found. Now, in short but decisive order, the enemy has one primary game plan in spiritual warfare, that is, to cause you to transgress the Father's will. And regrettably, many within our nation are so spiritually inept, they won't last one round with the enemy. Quite the contrary, they are spiritual flunkies who have adopted a defeatist reality because they are the biggest losers in spiritual warfare for the simple but sure fact that they are addicted to lawlessness. And then there are the true contenders, men and women who have a sincere desire for truth, who have love for Elohim, and who will force the enemy to work overtime in the battle. For he knows he will not defeat us in spiritual warfare with some casual form of enticement. Quite the contrary, he must use deception and distractions to cause us to lose sight of the Father's will. Not only this, but he must cause us to become, to some degree, complacent for two primary reasons. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. First, you are more likely to be distracted if you are complacent. And second, complacency is the one degree that opens you up to every other degree of lawlessness. My dear friends, check the archives. I've told you this before, which is why I spend so much time and effort warning you about the dangers of complacency. Not only this, but it is also why I have constantly promoted growth, mastery, and spiritual practices. It is because the only way the enemy can defeat a true contender like you and me is if we become complacent. For if we become complacent, we can be distracted. And if we are distracted, we can most certainly be deceived. And so, what should you do? You, my friend, must put on the girdle of truth, and you must never take it off. Here is why. When the enemy engages you in spiritual warfare, he will not last one round. For when you go to battle with the girdle of truth, he will flee from you without a trace and nowhere to be found. We know this because the outcome of every spiritual battle is determined prior to the battle. And because you were wearing the girdle of truth, here is what you were doing prior to the battle. Consider this. The enemy tried to infect you with complacency, but you resisted him and you continued in prayer, fasting, and focus. And thus, when the enemy tried to distract you, he failed miserably because you knew exactly what he was trying to do. Why? It's because the helmet of salvation is communicating with you, and the girdle of truth is leading you on to victory. You'll know because when the enemy tries to deceive you, you will see right through every deception as the eyes of your heart lead you to the altar of worship as a witness that you are operating in spirit and in truth. Now, everything we have learned for the past 12 months confirms this matter. As I said before, check the archives and you will see a man who lives by faith, obedience, virtue, and the fear of Elohim will always gain the victory. Not only this, but this reality speaks to the verb form of the word girdle, which you learn in the most recent podcast. Remember, to girdle is to encompass, encircle, or enclose with a belt. Now, get this. When you unlock the fear of Elohim via spiritual values, reverence, and worship, Yahuwah will encompass, encircle, and enclose you with so much truth that you will never believe a lie. And this, my friends, is why the girdle of truth is your key to victory and winning every spiritual battle. It is why you, my friend, will live forever, while many in this nation will surely die. Now, the conclusion of these matters is sure. Vis-a-vis, it is indeed a tragedy that the restoration of the nation of Israel had more casualties than victories. And yet, you must believe me, there was no other way. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, when given the freedom of choice, the majority of men will always choose unwisely. And if you would receive it, because of this reality, tragedy is our national history. And tragedy, my friends, is our national destiny. Trust me, it doesn't matter what season we're in. The enemy will always find some fool who is willing to sell out his own people because he would rather pursue lawlessness than put on the girdle of truth. For look, listen, it has been written, for truth has fallen in the street, and equity is unable to enter. That being said, the real tragedy is not the fact that history repeats itself. Quite the contrary. The real tragedy is that our nation, from its inception, was never able or willing to give Yahuwah the benefit of a full harvest. My dear friends, even in our optimal spiritual state, during the optimal spiritual season, a season of restoration and a time of refreshing, the best our nation could yield to the master of the harvest is a remnant. And so, if you think this story somehow ends well for sinners in Zion, I say, if you think there remains a rest for the transgressors in Jacob, let me tell you something. There will be no happy ending for anyone who is not guarding all the commands of Elohim in the spirit of obedient faith. Listen to me if you want to live. Yahuwah is preparing a sacrifice in the land of Mystery Babel to consume all the transgressors and Jacob, to remove them with all the stumbling blocks and those doing lawlessness from the earth prior to the reign of Yahushua Messiah. My dear friends, he's consuming them even now. Let me tell you something. Many transgressors in Jacob are dying, and many of them are already dead. For look, listen, it has been written, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living Elohim. Look again and understand. Listen, I say, the day of vengeance is in my heart. I shall repay. Therefore, seeing the wrath of Elohim has come down on this nation, guard your heart from being cast about. For after all this, the hand of Elohim is not finished. The hand of Elohim is still stretched out. Now, here is the final word. We are debtors to fate and time, my friends, and that which was shall be again. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, we are not unfeeling toward the plight of the poor souls who are dying in this nation during a season of rejuvenation in which He, our Master Yahuwah, has come to save us. Quite the contrary. And as I said before, it is a tragedy and a sheer pity. And yet, the reality is, we have seen this tragedy before. My dear friends, check the book. Pity is our history. And as for our sorrows, we are the ones to blame. Brothers and sisters, I advise you to consider Isaiah chapter 5 and read the parable of the vineyard and how Yahuwah provided his vineyard with the ideal conditions and he waited for the yielding of the grapes. And yet, when the time of yielding came, this vineyard yielded wild, i.e., spiritually rotten grapes in an environment that was designed to produce a fruitful and desirable harvest. The vineyard of Elohim yielded wild grapes. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, we are reliving Isaiah chapter 5, which is why our nation is persistently dying and we are witnessing spiritual genocide. Heretofore, I recommend take also the girdle of truth and unite your spiritual armor. And while others are fated as vessels for destruction, you will be a vessel unto honor. Hallelujah. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. We covered a lot of material, and so that is the only assignment for today. Consider these matters, my friends, and be watchful as you pray. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 496, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 6. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 497, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 7. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.